Hello and welcome to this little video of 25 Easter eggs and things you may have missed in the case of the Vexed Vampire, which is taken from the Casebook of Sam Spallucci, which was the first foray into the world of fiction for my paranormal investigator Sam Spallucci, published way back in 2012. Now, before I carry on, please hit that like button and perhaps consider giving a quick subscribe. That way you'll be notified of all these videos when they pop up from time to time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon book club members, Gemma Innes and Paul Lewis. Thank you guys for helping to make this video happen. If you're interested in getting shout out in these little Easter egg videos, then why not consider subscribing? There's a link down below and membership starts from just £1 a month. And the top tier members even get free books when they're published of all my new works. Number 1. Harry Kim, the owner of the Paradise Dragon, jokingly refers to Sam as Harrison Ford. This is a nice little reference to Blade Runner. You know, you've got this sort of film noir feeling going on like we have with Sam. And Blade Runner is an awesome movie. It's one of my favourites. I had to get it in there at some point. Number 2. Sam orders bean curd. This is sort of like the first reference to his dietary habits. Sam is vegan. Doesn't explicitly say it, but it's just that little hint. And there's one later on in the same story where Splish refers to him that it doesn't even eat eggs. Number 3. Sam's chopsticks were presents from his parents and they're tipped in solid silver. Now this was preparing for 3 books in the future for Dark Justice, where he'd used them to impale the hand of sleazy paranormal investigator Wayne Diamond. Number 4. Whilst eating his meal, Sam thinks about possibly ringing his mum, who he hasn't spoken to for years. But he doesn't because, you know, he's afraid that she'll want to talk about Dad. In the next case, the case of the fastidious phantom, we actually find this is because Sam's dad died, you know, when Sam was in his early 20s, and then crops up as a ghost in the next book, in 2 books' time, Shadows of Lancaster. Number 5. Sam's watch is a Tissot, a rather nice Swiss-made thing. And this is actually a reference to one of my watches, which was handed down to me by my dad. Number 6. In the borough, when Grace asks Sam if he wants to go out clubbing, you know, sort of much to Sam's worry, you know, him being too old, as it were. This is sort of the first hint we get in the series that Grace has a bit of a crush on Sam. You know, she sees him with these rose-tinted spectacles. And indeed, when they do finally go out clubbing, the same fact is actually picked up on by Dave Nichols, the vampire. Number 7. Grace takes Sam and Dave down to the Sugar House. Now, this, back in the 1990s, was the heart of all student activity, and, you know, is one of these archetypal sticky floor nightclubs. It's still there, and as far as I'm aware, it still fulfills the same function. Number 8. When we first encounter Dave the vampire, he's dressed as Spock, and it's Spock from the original series. In fact, he's very, very dismissive when Sam makes a reference to Zachary Quinto from the Abrams reboot. And this is actually a direct reference in itself to an episode from The Big Bang Theory, when Sheldon Cooper orders a great big cardboard cutout of Spock, and the wrong one is delivered. Number 9. Case of the Vexed Vampire was a good way for me to start to establish vampiric lore in the Spallucci-verse. So, for example, crucifixes don't work on them. Holy water's not a thing. So why is that then? Well, Shrody, actually it's to imply that they are a force of good, not a force of evil. But Sam still had to invite, Dave into his house. That's what you normally do with vampires, isn't it? Yes, that's just because he was being polite. Number 10. Dave says that he owns the SciFi comic book shop down on North Road, and in fact we see it in the story. And this was based on a real place which I used to frequent a lot when I was much younger, Interstellar Master Traders. Sadly, it's no longer there, just preserved in, a little bit of fiction. Number 11. When Dave introduces himself, Sam asks, well, shouldn't your name be Vlad or Lestat? Obviously referencing, two famous literary vampires, Dracula, obviously, and the vampire Lestat. And this is sort of like called back to, again, later on in the story when they talk about Eric being a name for a vampire in True Blood. And Spliff turns around and actually says, Dave, well, isn't that a crap name for a vampire? And also going on much later, we find out that vampires choose their own names. Not saying too much here, but if you read the Bobby Normal books, you might find out what Dave's name becomes. Number 12. Dave's reaction to Grace turning up. Grace turns up at the flat to take Sam out clubbing. And, Dave isn't fazed by this, even though he's a vampire. And there's no pointy teeth, there's no grrr or anything like that. He just accepts the fact that this girl wants to take that fella out clubbing. And this sort of cements his personality. Even though he is a supernatural being, he still has a very human look at things around him. Number 13. When Sam and Dave are discussing the merits of the varying Battlestar Galactica shows, the old one versus the more modern one, Sam says he never really got into the more modern one. He found it was very post 9/11 with the enemies hiding in plain sight. This is actually a reference to the constructs which are all around. And in fact, they're just about to meet one. The idea that constructs can look just like anybody else until they're actually activated. Number 14, the side of the sugar house when they reach it is graffitied with the graffiti, Spud was here. And this is setting up the story which we'll find 2 books later in Shadows of Lancaster, Case of the Grotesque, get it right, Graffiti. And Spud being that animated grotesque who lives up on the priory, going around graffitiing things because he wants to spread his artwork. Number 15, the Crass Clubber, who's sort of like Dave and Spliff encounter just as they're about to go into the sugar house, who then turns out to be a construct later on, was actually based almost directly on one of the 2 fat slags from the Viz comics. I was going for this terrible person who thought she was actually it and just wasn't. And the reference that she has no belly button is also referenced in Girls Just Want to Have Fun, the vampire short story which I was writing at the same time. And it is actually one of the tells that the person in front of you is actually a construct. They may look human, but they have that one little thing missing because, of course, they were never born. Number 16. When Grace buys Sam a drink, she gets him a beer, because obviously they don't have whiskey in the nightclub. But she gets herself a non-alcoholic drink. And we find out a few books later, this is because her father was actually an alcoholic. So therefore, she doesn't touch the stuff herself. Number 17. The state of Spliff's flat and his cat Dante are actually based upon a friend of mine who I knew years ago who was a college chaplain. His flat was constantly a mess, and he had this black ball of fur and hate who loved him and nobody else. But as the books have progressed, and as my own little cat came into my life, we found that Dante has taken on more of Schrodinger's personality rather than the original one, who was based upon Mephistopheles. Number 18. When Spliff offers to hypnotize Dave, Dave refers it to what McCoy tried to do to Captain Kirk in a 1982 Star Trek novel called The Prometheus Design. Well, isn't that a little obscure? How did you find that? You know what, Shirley? Over 10 years ago since I wrote this, I haven't got a clue. I probably just Googled it. Number 19. In his hypnotized state, Dave says that the vampire who created him to be a vampire himself looked rather like T'Pol, the security officer from the Enterprise in the TV series of the same name. When Sam finally meets Nightingale, he says himself that he feels she looked more like Esri Dax. In reality, she was actually based upon the actress Kate Bracken, who played the ghost Alex in the final series of Being Human. Number 20. When he is turned, Dave is told the three things that all children of Cain are told when they become vampires: find the Eternals, protect the twins, and await the divergence. Even then, I had to look at my screen down here to remember the order of the three. Fun fact, I can never remember. I have to have it written down in a file which I refer to every single time I use it. My memory is shocking. Number 21. Sam sleeps and has nightmares about constructs, leaving Spliff to look after Dave to make sure that Dave doesn't run away. Spliff falls asleep, Dave does a runner, and Spliff apologizes in the morning. This is a direct reference to the next story, the case of the fastidious phantom, when he did the same about 15, 16 years ago, and they lost the ghost Gerald. Number 22. When Dave is birthed, he suffers what all vampires suffer. They have this nightmare of the time when they are going to die. They don't remember the nightmare themselves, but they're very vocal about it when they're being birthed. So those around them tell them this story after, they've gone through this birthing process. Now, in this one, Dave mentions that he is in the lair of Cainor and he sees Cainor, and is the first time that Cainor's name is actually used, not only in the book, but in the whole sort of vampire history. He is the first vampire who has ever been birthed to use Cainor's name and give a name to his creature who's supposed to bring about divergence and is gradually bumping off the vampires using his constructs or even in person. The question we have to ourselves is, why? Perhaps Dave, or whoever he will be in his new name in the future, actually has a close relationship with Cainor. Wait and see. Number 23. To save Dave's life, Sam is an unwilling donor of blood, shall we say. Obviously, he would have given blood, but he wants to save his life. But do you really want to have to do it? You just have to do it, don't you, I suppose? But while he's out, he has this vision, as it were, of this cloaked black figure called Claw, who is leading vampires into battle. And this is a setup for many, many books in the future. In fact, it's set up for the Bobby Normal books, when we come across Claw as one of the members of the Children of Cain, and also for the Divergent Land books, which I haven't even started writing yet, because Claw will be central to those stories. Number 24. Nightingale and Marcus both describe the their nightmares, which they have when they're born. Nightingale says that she will die at the hands of a man with a gun, which is obviously very odd because the gun shouldn't kill her. And this is a call forward to Fallen Angel. We will come across Nightingale's death in that book. Marcus says that he will die greeting the sun as a harbinger. And this is a reference to Child of Fire, which at the time of recording this, I'm just about starting to write. It's going to be a side novella to Lux Eterna, Sam's 8th adventure, and we'll publish alongside Child of Light. And we'll tell the two individual stories of the twins, Alec and, in this case, Amanda, his sister. Number 25, the last one. The vampires in my universe refer to themselves as the children of Cain, and this is taking the biblical reference. You know, in the Bible, Cain slew Abel and a fit of jealousy, and then showed remorse. That was made to wander off into the lands forever, an outcast. In this universe, it takes that and it has full repercussions. Cain is taken in by this fallen angel who then turns him into a vampire. But the blood of Abel, which was spilt on the ground, was eaten by an insane wolf, who then became the first werewolf and became the first member of the bloodline of Abel, who's also talked about here in the Vexed Vampire. And of course, the werewolves turn up in the very last story of the book, the case of the werewolf of Williamson Park. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed those. So 25 little Easter eggs. If you haven't done so already, quick like, quick subscribe, that'd be fantastic. And I'll see you again soon.